$11.3 billion. That is the number. That is the number that a Pentagon official sat in a closed-door session before members of the United States Congress and admitted out loud $11.3 billion in 7 days, not 7 months, not 7 years, 7 days, 168 hours. And while that number was being spoken in a classified briefing room on Capitol Hill, while members of Congress were adjusting their glasses and leaning forward in their chairs and asking their aides to confirm that they had heard correctly, the Department of Defense was still publicly telling the American people that the operation was limited, targeted, and under control. Limited, targeted, under control. $11.3 billion in 7 days. Those words do not belong in the same sentence. Let me put that number in a form that your brain can actually process, because 11.3 billion is a figure that is specifically designed to be too large for a human mind to meaningfully comprehend. That is not an accident. Large numbers are a form of camouflage. When a government says it spent $11 billion most, people hear the words, register that it is a lot of money, and move on. The number is so far removed from daily experience that it becomes abstract. It loses its weight, it stops feeling real, and that is exactly what the people who spent it are counting on. So let me make it real. $11.3 billion in 7 days is $1.6 billion per day. It is $67 million per hour. It is $1.1 million per minute. Every 60 seconds that this conflict was active, the United States government spent more than $1 million. While you slept, $1 million a minute. While you drove to work, $1 million a minute. While you ate dinner with your family and talked about your day and helped your kids with homework and watched something on television and went to bed, $1 million per minute was being taken from the national treasury and converted into explosions on the other side of the world every minute for 7 days straight. Now here is the number that will keep you awake tonight, that $11.3 billion is your money. It is not the Pentagon's money. It is not Congress's money. It is not the president's money. It is your money taken from you, through taxes you have already paid and through debt that you and your children and your grandchildren will be paying off for decades. The United States government does not have a separate account labeled war money that exists independently from the rest of the federal budget. Every dollar spent on this operation is a dollar that was not spent on something else, something that might have actually improved your life. $11.3 billion is enough to pay the annual salaries of over 200,000 public school teachers. It is enough to fund the entire annual budget of the National Cancer Institute, the organization responsible for finding cures for the disease that will kill 1 in 3 Americans. It is enough to rebuild every single bridge in the United States that the Department of Transportation has classified as structurally deficient. It is enough to provide clean drinking water infrastructure to every community in America that currently does not have it. It is enough to fund veterans' mental health services for the next 15 years at current levels. 15 years of mental health care for the people who fought the last wars, or 7 days of fighting a new one. That was the trade. That is the trade that was made on your behalf, without your input, without your consent, and until that closed-door briefing, without your knowledge. And here is the part that should make you furious. They were not going to tell you. The $11.3 billion figure was disclosed in a classified briefing to selected members of Congress. It was not announced at a press conference. It was not included in a public statement. It was not part of any official communication. To the American people whose money was being spent, it was leaked. A member of Congress or a congressional staffer or someone in the briefing room decided that the American public had a right to know what was being done with their money, and they told a journalist. CBS News reported it. And that is the only reason you know. If that one person had stayed silent, if that one act of conscience or frustration or political calculation had not occurred, you would still not know. You would still be hearing the words limited, targeted, and under control, and you would have no reason to question them. That pattern, the pattern of concealment followed by reluctant disclosure, is not new. It is the single most consistent feature of every American military engagement of the last 50 years. And once I show you the pattern, you will understand not just what happened this week, but what is going to happen next week and next month and next year. Because this pattern does not vary. It has never varied, not once. Tell me in the comments right now, before this video, had you heard the $11.3 billion figure? Had any news broadcast you watched reported it as a lead story? And if not, why do you think that is? Because the answer to that question tells you everything about how war costs are managed in the American political system. Let me show you the pattern, because the pattern is the key to understanding everything. Every American military engagement of the modern era has followed the exact same cost trajectory. Phase 1 is the initial estimate. Before the operation begins or in its earliest days, the administration provides a cost estimate that is deliberately, systematically, and dramatically lower than what anyone inside the Pentagon actually believes the operation will cost. This is not a mistake. This is not optimism. This is strategy. The initial estimate is designed to make the operation politically palatable. It is designed to prevent sticker shock. It is designed to get the public and Congress past the critical decision point before the real numbers emerge. Phase 2 is the revision. Weeks or months into the operation, the costs begin to exceed the initial estimates. The Pentagon requests supplemental funding. Emergency appropriations bills are passed. The numbers start climbing, but each revision is presented as a modest adjustment, a slight increase due to unforeseen circumstances. An additional allocation needed to complete the mission. Each individual revision seems reasonable. It is only when you line them up in sequence that you see the trajectory, and the trajectory always goes in one direction, up. Phase 3 is the revelation. Months or years after the operation began, the true costs emerge, sometimes through investigative journalism, sometimes through congressional audits, sometimes through leaked documents, and the true costs are always, without exception, multiples of the original estimate, not slightly higher, multiples. Let me give you the receipts, because this pattern is not theoretical. It is documented. The first Gulf War in 1991, the initial cost estimate provided to Congress was $15 billion. The final cost, calculated years later by the Congressional Research Service, was $61 billion, 4 times the original estimate, and that was considered a short, successful, limited operation. The invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. The initial cost estimate for the first year of operations was $14 billion. The total cost of the Afghanistan war over 20 years exceeded $2.3 trillion. That is not a typo, 2.3 trillion. The initial annual estimate was off by a factor of over 160 when measured against the total cost of the engagement it initiated. The invasion of Iraq in 2003. The Bush administration's initial estimate, provided publicly by officials who looked directly into television cameras and stated these numbers with confidence, was $50–60 billion for the entire operation. The Pentagon's own internal estimates, which were suppressed at the time and revealed years later, were significantly higher. The actual cost of the Iraq War, including long-term veterans' care and interest on the debt incurred to fund it, is estimated by researchers at Brown University's Costs of War project at over $3 trillion. The initial estimate was off by a factor of 50–60. Now look at what just happened with Iran. The first week cost $11.3 billion. The first week. If this operation continues for 1 month at the same burn rate, the cost will exceed $45 billion. If it continues for 6 months, the cost will exceed $270 billion. If it becomes a sustained engagement lasting years, which is what has happened with every single American military operation in the Middle East since 1990, the costs will be measured in the trillions, and every single dollar of it will come from you. But the $11.3 billion figure is itself almost certainly an undercount. And here is why. The Pentagon's cost calculations for military operations typically include only direct operational costs: fuel, ammunition, equipment wear and tear, deployment logistics, and combat pay. They do not include the long-term costs that dwarf the operational spending. They do not include the lifetime medical care for wounded service members, which for previous Middle Eastern wars has exceeded the operational costs by a factor of 3 to 5. They do not include the interest payments on the debt incurred to fund the operation, which over 30 years can double the original cost. They do not include the economic opportunity costs, the growth that did not happen because resources were diverted from productive investment to military expenditure. They do not include the replacement cost of equipment consumed or destroyed, which takes years to manufacture and procure. When you add all of those costs together, the true cost of the first week of this operation is not $11.3 billion. It is likely somewhere between $30 and $50 billion for 1 week. And now let me tell you about the other thing that was revealed in that closed-door briefing. The thing that is in some ways even more disturbing than the cost, the injuries. CBS News reported that the briefing included information about injuries to American service members from an Iranian attack in Kuwait on March 1st that were more serious than had been previously revealed. More serious than previously revealed. Read those words again. More serious than previously revealed. That means the Department of Defense knew that American service members had been seriously injured and chose not to tell the American public the full extent of those injuries. This is not the first time this has happened. It is not the second time. It is not the 10th time. It is a pattern so consistent and so well documented that it has its own informal name. Inside the military, it is called the injury lag, and it works exactly the same way every single time. When American forces are attacked and service members are injured, the initial public report always minimizes the severity. The language follows a specific template: minor injuries, precautionary evaluations, all personnel returned to duty, headaches and concussion-like symptoms being monitored. This language is not accidental. It is carefully constructed to create an impression of minimal harm without technically lying. Because weeks or months later, when the full medical assessments are complete, the picture always changes. Minor injuries become traumatic brain injuries. Precautionary evaluations become medevac flights to Germany. All personnel returned to Duty becomes medical discharges and disability ratings. Headaches become lifelong neurological damage. This exact pattern played out after the January 2020 Iranian missile attack on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. The initial Pentagon statement said no casualties. Then it was revised to 11 injuries, then 234, then 250. Then over 100 service members were eventually diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries. From that single attack, the president at the time publicly dismissed the injuries as headaches. Those headaches turned in 2 years of cognitive impairment, chronic pain, vision problems, and psychiatric symptoms for dozens of American service members. Some of them will never fully recover, and the American public was told for weeks that nobody was hurt. The same pattern is now repeating with the Kuwait attack, more serious than previously revealed, which means the injuries you were told about were not the real injuries. The real injuries were worse, and they were concealed from you deliberately, not because of operational security, not because of medical privacy, but because accurately. Reporting American casualties makes war politically more expensive. It makes the public ask questions. It makes Congress ask questions. It makes the cost-benefit calculation of the operation harder to defend. So the injuries are minimized in public while the service members who sustained them are treated quietly, out of sight there. Suffering invisible to the nation that sent them into harm's way. Let me connect these two revelations, the cost and the injuries, because together they tell a story that is more important than either one alone. The American system for conducting military operations abroad is built on a foundation of information management, not information sharing, information management. The public is told what they need to be told to maintain sufficient support for the operation to continue, no more, no less. The costs are minimized in the early stages because accurate costs would generate opposition. The injuries are minimized because accurate casualty reporting would generate opposition. The strategic objectives are simplified and dramatized because honest assessments of strategic complexity would generate confusion and skepticism. And by the time the true costs, the true casualties, and the true strategic picture emerge, the operation has been running long enough that ending it is politically framed as losing, and no politician wants to be responsible for losing. So the operation continues, and the costs continue, and the casualties continue, and the cycle feeds itself. If this analysis is showing you a pattern that changes how you understand what is happening right now, a like genuinely helps this reach the people who are paying for this war and deserve to know what it actually costs. Now let me take you inside the $11.3 billion, because where the money goes is a story that is just as important as how much was spent. When the Pentagon says an operation cost $11.3 billion in 1 week, most people imagine that money being spent on missiles and jet fuel and soldier salaries, and some of it was, but the majority of that money did not go where you think it went. The majority of it went into the accounts of private corporations, defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, logistics companies, technology firms, the companies that build the missiles, maintain the aircraft, operate the communications systems, provide the satellite imagery, manage the supply chains, and increasingly conduct operations that used to be performed by uniformed military personnel. Let me give you the breakdown as accurately as publicly available data allows. The Tomahawk cruise missiles that are the backbone of American standoff strike capability cost approximately $2 million each. Reports indicate that hundreds were fired in the first week of operations. That alone is over $1 billion. But the missiles are just the most visible expense. The aircraft carrier strike groups deployed to the region cost approximately $6.5 million per day to operate per carrier group. Multiple carrier groups have been deployed. The aerial refueling, electronic warfare, surveillance, and fighter escort packages that support strike operations cost tens of millions of dollars per sortie. The precision-guided munitions dropped by aircraft range from $20,000 to over $300,000 each. Thousands were expended. But here is the part that most people never see. For every dollar spent on the weapon itself, approximately $3 to $5 are spent on the support infrastructure that makes the weapon usable: transportation to theater, storage and handling, maintenance of the delivery platform, communications and intelligence support, force, protection for the bases from which operations are conducted, medical support for the personnel involved, administrative and logistical overhead. The missile costs $2 million, but getting that missile from a factory in Arizona to a launch tube in the Persian Gulf and firing it at a target requires a support chain that costs $8 to $10 million. The weapon is the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is the bureaucracy. And all of that money flows to private companies: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, now RTX, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, by Systems, L3Harris Technologies. These companies do not just build weapons. They are integrated into every layer of the American military apparatus. They maintain the aircraft. They operate the logistics networks. They provide the cybersecurity. They run the satellite communications. They train the personnel. They analyze the intelligence. The line between the United States military and the private defense industry has not just blurred, it has effectively disappeared. And here is the number that tells the real story. In the first week of this conflict, the stock prices of the 5 largest American defense contractors rose by a combined average of 11%. 11% in 1 week. The market capitalization gained by these companies in that single week exceeded $40 billion. Let me say that again. The American taxpayer spent $11.3 billion. The defense companies that received most of that money saw their stock values increase by $40 billion. The shareholders of those companies, the people who own the stock, the institutional investors, the hedge funds, the pension funds that hold large defense sector positions, they made $40 billion in paper wealth in the same week that the American Treasury lost $11.3 billion in real money. Wealth was not created, it was transferred from you to them. Now I want to be precise about this because intellectual honesty matters. Defense companies provide a necessary function. National defense requires weapons, technology, and industrial capacity. The people who work at these companies are building products that the military needs. There is nothing inherently corrupt about a company making a profit on a government contract. The issue is not that defense companies exist. The issue is the incentive structure. When the companies that profit most from war have more lobbyists on Capitol Hill than any other industry, when they donate more to political campaigns than almost any other sector, when their executives rotate in and out of senior Pentagon positions through a revolving door that has been documented exhaustively, and when their stock prices rise every single time American forces are deployed, the incentive structure is not aligned with the public interest. It is aligned with the perpetuation of conflict. Not because anyone is sitting in a boardroom saying, let us start a war, but because the system is designed in a way that makes war profitable for the people who have the most influence over the decisions about whether to go to war. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a structural analysis of incentives, and the $11.3 billion first week is a perfect case study in how those incentives operate. Now let me show you what this means for the American economy, because the costs of this operation are not limited to the military budget. They ripple through the entire economic system in ways that most people never connect to the conflict. The United States is currently carrying a national debt of over $34 trillion. The annual interest payment on that debt is now the single largest line item in the federal budget, exceeding even military spending. Every additional dollar of military expenditure that is financed through borrowing, which is how virtually all war spending is funded, adds to that debt and adds to the annual interest payment. At current interest rates, every $1 billion borrowed today will cost approximately $50 million per year in interest payments for the next 30 years. The $11.3 billion spent in the first week will generate approximately $565 million in interest payments over 30 years. That is over $500 million in interest alone on 1 week of fighting. And that borrowing has consequences that extend far beyond the federal budget. When the government borrows heavily, it competes with private borrowers for available capital. That competition pushes interest rates up. Higher interest rates make mortgages more expensive. They make car loans more expensive. They make business loans more expensive. They make credit card debt more expensive. Every American who borrows money for any purpose is indirectly paying for this operation through higher interest rates caused by government borrowing. You do not receive a bill labeled war tax, but you pay it every month in the form of higher costs on every loan you carry. The inflationary impact is equally direct. Military spending pumps money into specific sectors of the economy, defense, energy, logistics, without producing consumer goods that people can buy. That is textbook inflationary pressure. More money chasing the same amount of goods. The Federal Reserve has been fighting to bring inflation under control for the past 3 years. Every $1 billion of war spending makes that fight harder. And when the Fed responds by keeping interest rates higher for longer, the consequences fall directly on American households. Higher mortgage rates, slower wage growth, reduced home values in some markets, a delayed economic recovery that affects employment, investment, and consumer confidence. The energy market impact is the most immediately visible. We have covered in previous breakdowns on this channel how conflict in the Persian Gulf affects global oil prices. The first week of operations saw oil prices increase by over 12% at the American gas pump. That translates to approximately 42.50 cents per gallon. The average American household consumes roughly 1,000 gallons of gasoline per year. A 50-cent increase sustained over a year costs the average family $500. For a family earning the median American household income of approximately $75,000, $500 is not trivial. It is the grocery budget for a month. It is a child's school supplies for the year. It is the difference between making the car payment on time and paying a late fee. And gasoline is only the most visible energy cost. Diesel prices, which affect the cost of transporting every product in the American supply chain, rose by a similar percentage, Natural gas prices, which affect home heating and electricity generation, followed. The cumulative effect is a broad-based price increase across the entire economy that functions as a tax on every American household, a tax that was never voted on, a tax that was never debated, a tax that was imposed by military decisions made thousands of miles away by people who will never feel its impact personally. Drop your answer in the comments. When you calculate the direct taxpayer cost, the interest on the debt, the inflationary impact, and the energy price increase together, what do you estimate the true first-week cost of this operation is for the average American household? Because I have run the numbers and the answer is significantly higher than most people would guess, and I want to know if your estimate matches mine. Now let me address the human cost, because the dollar figures, as staggering as they are, do not capture the full price of this operation. And the revelation about the Kuwait injuries makes this discussion not just important but urgent. The pattern of injury concealment that I described earlier has a direct financial dimension that compounds over decades. When the Pentagon initially reports minor injuries, the immediate cost appears low. A few medical evaluations, some monitoring, maybe a short hospital stay. But when those minor injuries are later reclassified as traumatic brain injuries, as chronic conditions requiring ongoing treatment, as disabilities requiring lifetime benefits, the cost profile changes dramatically. The Department of Veterans Affairs currently provides care and benefits to approximately 9 million veterans. The annual VA budget is approximately $300 billion. That budget is already insufficient to meet the needs of veterans from previous conflicts. Wait times for mental health appointments average weeks in many facilities. Disability claim processing backlogs number in the hundreds of thousands. Veteran suicide remains at crisis levels, with approximately 17 veterans taking their own lives every day. Every new conflict adds to the burden on a system that is already breaking. The long-term medical costs of caring for veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars have been estimated by researchers at Harvard and Brown universities at over $2 trillion over the lifetime of those veterans. $2 trillion. For context, that is more than the entire operational cost of both wars combined. The medical costs exceed the military costs, and those costs will continue accumulating for the next 50 years as those veterans age and their conditions progress. The service members injured in the Kuwait attack will join that pipeline. Their initial treatment cost will appear in this year's defense budget. Their long-term care costs will appear in VA budgets for the next 40 to 50 years. Their disability benefits will be paid by taxpayers who have not yet been born, and the full scope of their injuries that were initially minimized and concealed, will not be fully understood for years, because traumatic brain injury is a condition that evolves over time. Symptoms that are manageable today may become debilitating in 5 years. Cognitive functions that seem intact now may deteriorate gradually. The true cost of the Kuwait injuries will not be known for decades, but it will be paid every dollar by you. Now let me talk about what is not in the $11.3 billion figure, because what is missing from that number is in many ways more important than what is included. The $11.3 billion does not include the cost of replacing the munitions expended. Every Tomahawk missile fired must be replaced. Every precision-guided bomb dropped must be replaced. Every round of ammunition used must be replaced. The defense industrial base does not produce these items instantly. Production lines have limited capacity. Supply chains for specialized components are complex and sometimes fragile. Replacing the munitions used in the first week of operations will take months to years and will cost billions of dollars in new procurement contracts. Those contracts have not been signed yet. They are not in the $11.3 billion, but they are coming. The $11.3 billion does not include the cost of equipment maintenance and replacement. Modern military equipment operates in extreme conditions: desert heat, corrosive salt air, high-tempo operations that compress years of normal wear in 2 weeks. Aircraft that would normally fly a certain number of hours per month are flying that many hours per day. Ship engines that would normally be serviced on a regular schedule are running continuously. Vehicles that would normally be rotated through maintenance cycles are being operated until they break. The maintenance backlog being accumulated right now will take years and billions of dollars to clear. Those costs will appear in future defense budgets, unlabeled, mixed in with routine maintenance spending, invisible to any casual observer. The $11.3 billion does not include the diplomatic costs, the State Department's crisis management operations, the emergency diplomatic travel, the evacuation preparations for American civilians in the region, the security upgrades at embassies and consulates across the Middle East, the emergency funding for allied governments that are hosting American forces or providing logistical support. All of these costs are real and significant, and none of them appear in the Pentagon's operational cost figure. The $11.3 billion does not include the intelligence costs, the CIA's operational spending in the theater, the NSA's increased surveillance coverage, the National Reconnaissance Office's satellite repositioning and additional imagery collection, the Defense Intelligence Agency's analytical surge. All of these agencies are spending money at elevated rates to support the operation, and their budgets are classified and not included in the Pentagon's public or semi-public cost figures. When you add all of these hidden costs to the acknowledged $11.3 billion, the true first-week cost of this operation is almost certainly north of $20 billion, and that is a conservative estimate. The real number may be significantly higher, we will not know for years, and by the time we know, it will be too late to do anything about it, which is, of course, the entire point of the information management system I described earlier. Control the numbers, control the timeline. By the time the truth emerges, the public has moved on and the money is gone. Let me now talk about who benefits from this spending, because the distribution of war costs and war profits is the most important and least discussed economic story in America. When the government spends $11.3 billion in a week, that money does not disappear. It goes somewhere. It goes into the accounts of defense contractors and their subcontractors. It goes to energy companies that supply fuel to the military. It goes to logistics firms that manage transportation and supply chains. It goes to technology companies that provide communications, cybersecurity, and intelligence support, and from those companies it flows to their shareholders in the form of increased stock prices and dividends. It flows to their executives in the form of bonuses and stock options. It flows to their employees in the form of salaries. And it flows to the politicians who approved the spending in the form of campaign contributions from the companies and individuals who profited from it. This is the circle. Taxpayer money flows to the government. The government flows it to defense companies. Defense companies flow a portion of it back to politicians. Politicians approve more spending. More taxpayer money flows. The circle is not hidden. It is not secret. It is documented in public campaign finance records, in lobbying, disclosure filings, in stock transaction reports, and in the annual reports of every major defense contractor. Anyone can see it. Almost nobody looks. In the current election cycle, the 5 largest defense contractors have collectively spent over $70 million on lobbying and campaign contributions. $70 million. That is a lot of money by any normal standard, but measured against the $11.3 billion those companies received in a single week of military operations, $70 million is a rounding error. It is the most efficient investment in American business. Spend $70 million, receive $11.3 billion. That is a return on investment of over 16,000%. No hedge fund, no venture capital firm, no stock market strategy in the history of finance has ever delivered a return of 16,000%. War is the most profitable investment in America, and the investors are using your money as the capital. Now I want to acknowledge something directly, because this channel does not deal in simple narratives. There are people who will hear this analysis and conclude that the war is purely a profit-making exercise by defense contractors. That is an oversimplification. The Iran conflict has genuine national security dimensions. Iran's nuclear program represents a real proliferation risk. Iranian proxy forces have attacked American personnel and American allies. The Strait of Hormuz is a genuine strategic choke point whose disruption would have catastrophic economic consequences. There are legitimate security arguments for the use of military force. This analysis does not deny that. What this analysis does is insist that you hold 2 ideas in your mind simultaneously. The security arguments may be real, and the profit motives are also real. And the system that decides when and how to use military force is influenced by both. And when the profit motive aligns with the security argument, as it always does in these situations, it becomes impossible to know which one is actually driving the decision. The security argument provides the justification. The profit motive provides the energy, and the American public, which pays the costs in blood and treasure, is never given enough information to determine which force is dominant. That ambiguity is not a bug in the system. It is the system. If this analysis is giving you a framework for understanding that no news broadcast has provided, a like helps this reach the people who are paying these costs and deserve this clarity. Now let me show you where this goes from here. The $11.3 billion first week is not an endpoint. It is a beginning, and the trajectory from here is predictable because it has been identical in every previous American military engagement. Costs escalate. They always escalate. They escalate because operations expand. They escalate because adversaries adapt and force more expensive countermeasures. They escalate because the military bureaucracy, once activated, generates its own momentum. They escalate because the political cost of withdrawing, of admitting that the operation is too expensive or not working, exceeds the financial cost of continuing. And they escalate because the people who profit from the escalation have more influence over the decision-making process than the people who pay for it. Based on the historical pattern, I can give you 3 cost scenarios for this conflict, and I want to be transparent that these are projections based on historical precedent, not predictions based on inside information. Scenario 1 is the short engagement. The conflict is contained to a limited exchange lasting 1 to 3 months. Diplomatic channels produce a ceasefire or a framework for de-escalation. Operations wind down. The total direct cost comes in between $40 and $70 billion. The total long-term cost, including veterans' care, equipment replacement, and debt service, comes in between $150 and $250 billion. This is the best-case scenario. It requires both sides to choose de-escalation quickly, based on current trajectories. This scenario is possible but not probable. Scenario 2 is the extended engagement. The conflict settles into a sustained military operation lasting 1 to 3 years. Not a full ground invasion, but continuous air and naval operations, special forces deployments, and proxy warfare management. The total direct cost reaches $200 to $400 billion. The total long-term cost reaches $800 billion to $1.2 trillion. This scenario mirrors the pattern of American involvement in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. It is the most common outcome of American military operations in the Middle East and is currently the most likely scenario. Scenario 3 is the quagmire. The conflict escalates beyond initial parameters. Ground forces are deployed. Occupation and stabilization operations become necessary. The engagement lasts 5 to 10 years or longer. The total direct cost exceeds $1 trillion. The total long-term cost exceeds $3 trillion. This scenario mirrors the full 20-year trajectory of the Afghanistan engagement. It is the scenario that no one in Washington is publicly discussing and that the historical pattern suggests is more likely than anyone currently admits. In every single previous American military engagement in the Middle East, the actual cost has fallen between Scenario 2 and Scenario 3. The actual cost has never fallen at or below Scenario 1. Never. Not once. The best-case scenario has never materialized, and there is no structural reason to believe it will materialize this time. Now let me tell you what you can do with this information, because understanding the pattern is only valuable if it changes how you act. First, understand that the cost figures you hear in the coming weeks and months will be systematically understated. They always are. When a government official gives you a number, mentally multiply it by 3. That will get you closer to the real cost, not exact, but closer. Second, understand that the injury reports you hear will be systematically understated. They always are. When the Pentagon says minor injuries, read that as injuries whose full severity will not be acknowledged for months or years. When they say all personnel return to duty, understand that returning to duty and being fully recovered are two very different things. Third, understand where the money is going. When you hear $11.3 billion, do not think of it as money that disappeared. Think of it as money that was transferred from your pocket to specific corporate accounts. You can look up those companies. You can look up their stock prices. You can look up their lobbying expenditures. You can look up their campaign contributions. The information is public. The circle is visible. Most people simply choose not to look. Fourth, understand the long-term costs. The direct operational cost is the smallest portion of the total expense. The medical care, the debt service, the equipment replacement, the economic opportunity costs, these long-term expenses will dwarf the operational spending by a factor of 3 to 5 when someone tells you the war cost X billion dollars. Understand that the true cost is 3 to 5x paid out over the next 50 years. And fifth, understand that you have a voice. Members of Congress approved this spending. Members of Congress will approve additional spending. They work for you. They respond to pressure. Not always, not perfectly, but the historical record shows that public awareness of war costs correlates directly with political pressure to constrain those costs. The Vietnam War ended in significant part because the American public demanded it. The Iraq War drew down in significant part because the American public demanded it. Awareness creates pressure. Pressure creates constraint. Constraint saves money and saves lives. The $11.3 billion figure that was whispered in a closed-door briefing on Capitol Hill was not supposed to reach you. It was supposed to stay inside that room, inside the circle of people who manage information about war costs, inside the system that decides how much you are allowed to know and when you are allowed to know it. But it reached you because someone in that room decided you had a right to know. And now that you know, the question is what you do with that knowledge. You can do nothing. Most people will do nothing. They will hear the number, feel a momentary flash of anger or concern, and return to the pattern of their daily lives. The system is designed for that response. It is optimized for that response. It counts on that response. Or you can remember. You can remember this number the next time someone tells you that the operation is limited and targeted and under control. You can remember this pattern the next time a cost estimate is presented as if it is a final figure rather than the opening bid in a negotiation with reality. You can remember who profits and who pays the next time a politician stands in front of a camera and explains why this particular military action is necessary and justified and will be over quickly. Because the most expensive lie in the history of the American Republic is the lie that war is affordable. It is never affordable, it is never limited, it is never over quickly, and the people who tell you otherwise are either deceiving you or deceiving themselves. The $11.3 billion first week is not an anomaly. It is a preview. The first installment on a bill that will keep arriving in your mailbox and in your children's mailboxes and in their children's mailboxes for decades after the last missile has been fired and the last soldier has come home. That is the real cost of war, not the number they tell you, the number they do not tell you, the number that accumulates silently in debt ledgers and VA hospital beds and broken families and lost opportunities and futures that were traded for explosions. That number is always bigger than the one they admitted to Congress, and the one they admitted to Congress was already bigger than anything they planned to tell you. The $11.3 billion is not the story. It is the crack in the wall through which you can see the story. And the story behind the wall is a story about who pays and who profits, who bleeds and who benefits, who is told the truth and who is managed with carefully constructed versions of it. That story is as old as war itself, and it has never once ended differently than it began. Now you see the wall. Now you see the crack. Now you see what is behind it. And that vision, uncomfortable as it is the most valuable thing this video can give you. Because in a system that depends on your ignorance, your knowledge is the only weapon that costs nothing and cannot be taken from you. If you made it to the end of this breakdown, you now understand the economics of war better than most members of Congress understood them before they voted to fund this operation. That is not a compliment to you. It is an indictment of the system, but it is also a fact, and facts, stubborn and uncomfortable and inconvenient as they are, remain the only foundation on which good decisions can be built. Subscribe if you have not already. Every video on this channel follows the money, follows the pattern, and follows the truth as far as it goes, regardless of where it leads or who it implicates. The next breakdown on this channel examines exactly where the $11.3 billion went, company by company, contract by contract, dollar by dollar, and shows you the revolving door between the Pentagon and the boardroom that makes it all possible. That video connects directly to everything you just learned. It will be on screen the moment it is ready. This has been an Atlas Geopolitical Analysis. All content is educational commentary and opinion based on historical patterns and publicly available information.